Awesome. We're going to give everyone just a few more minutes to arrive, and we'll get things started. So hang with us just for a moment. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to. It's 11 o'clock here on the East Coast, in beautiful North and South Carolina. I know here today in South Carolina it's supposed to be up over 90 plus degrees, which this is another great day in the spring in South Carolina. It hasn't even got hot yet. So welcome everyone to IRWA Chapter 31 first virtual transportation seminar. For those that are unfamiliar with IRWA Chapter 31, we are made up of membership of both North and South Carolina. So we have a wide, I know we've got a lot of folks out there from all over the country and all over and in Canada as well. So I wanted to throw that out there from where the area that we represent. I'll introduce myself real quick. My name is Frank Mundy. I am the Transportation Committee Chair for Chapter 31. Senior Vice President and Director of Geomatics for Stewart. We're a multidisciplinary design, engineering, planning, and surveying firm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, with offices in Charlotte, Durham, and Wilmington, North Carolina, as well as Columbia, South Carolina, where I am actually sitting today. I do want to welcome you once again. This is, like I said, our first time on doing a transportation virtual seminar. We've had great success within IRWA doing the local public agency committee. They've already had two with great success. So shout out to Anthony Alderman and all his team who have put that together thus far. But I do want to tell you that we've just been overwhelmed with the success and the registrant lists that have come to this. All of you that are online are representing 9 states within, as well as 1 Canadian province. So we've been just terribly humbled by the amount of interest in this. So we do appreciate that, and excited to have you all today. That kind of goes to, I want to give a shout out, if you will, to our chapter president, Chief Chastain of OR Colon, and Vice President Lisa Norris of Duke Energy, who was kind of is the brains behind this, and they've done a great job with their leadership to allow us to do this. As well, I wanted to say a special thanks to Neil Burleson of THC and Kevin Muldowney of Vaughn and Melton, who worked with our speakers today to bring them on board and so forth. So thank you to you guys. And finally, I want to give a special thanks to Matt Price of Stewart. He is our Director of IT, Chief Information Officer here at Stewart, and he is working behind the scenes to produce this Microsoft Teams Live event. This is the first time we've done this with IRWA Chapter 31, so I appreciate Matt for stepping up and doing that. So I'm sure it'll go off without a glitch. So if it doesn't, we'll know who to blame, if nothing else, right? So with that, a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We will have an attendee list, and just as kind of the backup to that, we would like for you to type your name into the Q&A, into the chat, into the Q&A, so that we have a record of kind of a backup record, if you will, for who all's here. And secondary to that, since this is a Microsoft Teams event, we would like for you to type your questions into the Q&A, and then at the end of each speaker, so our first speaker will have you gather your Q&A, and we'll ask those questions, and then at the end of the second speaker, we will ask those second questions. So if you'll type those in, that would be great. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. So I want to introduce Jamille Robbins with North Carolina Department of Transportation. Jamille is the public involvement, community studies, and a visualization group leader at NCDOT. He coordinates and supervises public outreach efforts throughout the department. His job duties also include overseeing and reviewing the approval of all the community impact assessments and indirect and cumulative effect reports, which are used in the preparation of environmental documents and during project permitting. He has a bachelor's degree from NC State, and he also is a committee member with the Transportation Research. So, Jamille, without further ado, we'll let you take it away.
All right, let me get on my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Jamille, you're good to. Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, good. Well, thank you guys for having me here today. The topic of my presentation is 21st century engagement. And I always like to start with some foundation, right? And that's the importance of public involvement. And I know prior to someone here, I'm preaching to the choir, but public involvement is a critical component in the transportation decision-making process. The public has useful opinions, insights, and observations to share on the performance and needs of the transportation system and the design of specific projects. Early and strong public engagement has the potential to accelerate project delivery by helping to identify and address public concerns early in the planning process. And I'm sure a lot of you on this webinar are familiar with with this picture. You know, the challenge with traditional public engagement techniques is that they are considered inadequate today by themselves. While we strive to make our public meetings as convenient as we can, it's just impossible to provide a date and time that works for everyone interested in a specific project, plan, study, or action. And all too often we hear from a similar demographic across the state, regardless of the proposed project, plan, study, or action. Another all too common issue are those few passionate individuals who often dominate community conversations. And poor participation is a common challenge for agencies across the country. And again, too often we do not get participation from the younger generation, minorities, and communities identified as limited English proficient. So reaching a broader demographic and beyond those few motivated, passionate individuals is extremely important for us. And then we had a new challenge. This happened. You know, this crisis really challenged every aspect of our lives. And thank God we're coming out of it on the other side now. But to that point, our recent administrations have made customer service a main focal point for the department. Our current administration has and is establishing a culture of innovation. And to meet these goals, it is important that we move and think outside the box when it comes to involving the public in our decision-making process. It is important that the public perceives us as a transparent agency. After all, we work for them. So logically, we turn to technology. Technology allows us the ability to gather valuable feedback from a more representative audience using virtual public involvement techniques, because they can help ensure that more people are engaged at the right time, reducing the likelihood of delays late in the planning and project development process. And oftentimes virtual activities can be accomplished at a lower cost, even when paired with in-person options. And they, really most times require fewer staff hours to prepare and execute. And when we talk about virtual engagement, all of our virtual tools are mobile friendly because this helps lower the barrier to participation. And I'm going to run a few stats by you, but and one of the things that we've experimented with are text, engaging through text. Reliance on smartphones for online access is really especially common among younger folks and lower income Americans and those with a high school education or less. The example, one of the picture you see about the text engagement was from a passenger ferry project here And we engaged about 900 participants, received almost 7,000 responses. And so, 13% of those were through text. So it was very promising. And we're going to continue to build on that. But just some stats. The graphic that you see is about a year and a half old. So didn't have time to update that graphic, but I want to give you the newer stats, right? So 97% of Americans own a cell phone, with 85% now owning a smartphone. Again, you see the importance of having all of our activities mobile friendly. And this is extremely important. Again, still around 85% of low income Americans own a smartphone, but get this, those making less than $30,000 a year, 76% of those own a smartphone, and 27% of those are dependent to smartphones for internet access only. They do not have another means of internet access. And when we talk about rural communities, 80% of rural community residents own a smartphone. Now, just a quick run through of our current toolbox, and then I'll go through some examples. Of course, we have our project websites, and social media for us has been a game changer. When it comes to awareness about our particular project plan studies and actions and our outreach efforts, we typically use Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But the ability to geofence and geo-target is really what has changed the game, right? Because now we're able to, when you think about our major interstate projects like I-95 widening, we're able to capture commuters like we've never been able to before. And then when we're talking about social media, I really want to talk about Nextdoor, just briefly. Nextdoor has really, if you're familiar with Nextdoor, you know that the good thing about it is a lot of the participants on Nextdoor are busybodies, right? So when we post in Nextdoor, the word really gets out about our outreach efforts. And then, of course, we have our webinar live streaming capabilities. As a department, we use GoToMeeting and Cisco WebEx. We also have online public engagement platforms that we have a subscription to, and we're able to use them on all of our projects. One is MetroQuest, and the other is publicinput.com. Both of these, typically we use MetroQuest for statewide initiatives, long-range planning efforts, and public input we typically use during project development process and on through to construction. And of course, we have our visualizations and videos. And jumping right into that, the informational videos have been extremely successful for us. The screenshots you see here is from a generic video that we've created. It's an educational video to teach the public how to read, design public meeting maps. And this is something that we do not have to continue to waste production time on every outreach effort. We just post that along with the other project-specific materials. But these pre-recorded videos, once the public meeting materials are developed, we record the video. It's typically narrated by someone on my staff, the comms office, or even the project manager, with all of the pertinent information that you would have at a public meeting. And then we post those to the project webpage, and then it is promoted on social media, and we drive people to our online engagement platforms to provide feedback. This is a project informational video. This is a specific example from the I-95 improvements project in Lumberton. So again, all the information that I talked about is included in here. And then back to our online engagement platforms. Again, MetroQuest and publicinput.com. With Public Input, we have an engagement hub where citizens can go and see all of our active projects. They can also access archive projects and participate. But what I want to talk about, we've engaged almost through our online platforms. We've received almost 1 million responses, right? So engaged a lot of folks, and it's really changed the game for us. But to give you a little bit of sense of kind of magnitude or the difference in traditional versus virtual engagement, we talk about a prioritization process, which is our STIP process. Prior to going virtual, during prioritization 3.0, we engaged a little over 200 participants and got feedback across the entire state. During prioritization 4.0, where we experimented with MetroQuest, that was a game changer because our engagement went up from about almost 2,800% to we received over 3,100 responses during that STIP outreach. And that really set us on the path to online engagement from that point forward. Another example, our long-range strategic plan, the 2040 plan and 2050 plan, that comparison. The 2040 plan received 8,500 surveys over a course of 3 phases altogether. The 2050 plan received over 30,000 surveys. And about 3 million people were engaged during that recent effort. This would include news interviews, surveys, email blasts, newsletters, DMV notifications, social media, and events. And a quick summary of those, the functionality and the benefits for those online platforms is that it really comes down to the data analysis, right? And compiling the data. And the old way was we, had to go through each comment that was received and put it in a spreadsheet. The platforms really speed that process up. We're able to provide multiple formats to our survey questions. We have interactive map-based engagement, so making it more fun to participate. Again, we integrated with social media. With Public Input, we're able to take written comment forms and scan those in, and they're automatically transcribed into our database. We also have phone call handling now. So for lower income, rural areas or the elderly who are not tech savvy, they don't like computers, they're able to call in and leave a comment, and it's automatically transcribed into our database for the project team to follow up. And then going back to that analysis, we're able to perform some deep analysis through segmentation through a variety of factors. And then visualizations. I'm a big proponent of project visualizations, 3D renderings, videos, interactive animations, etc. They provide us a way to immediately translate the appearance and location of designs and concepts with the purpose of promoting a better understanding of transportation projects and their associated impact. Visualizations can explain a project to anyone regardless of their background or prior knowledge. And these tools, just like the videos, can be easily dispersed across online channels such as social media, websites, and mobile phones. And I'm just going to walk through a couple of examples of our visualization products. This is an example of what we call photo simulation, where we take an image of the, take a picture of the project site. David and the team will, based on the designs, will create the rendering, the static rendering, and then it's superimposed on the photograph, giving the public a realistic image of what the project is going to look like. And this can really help to assuage fears and, again, promote a better dialogue with the public from looking at, overlooking at just a 2D plan sheet. Here's another example of a static rendering. Again, the level of detail varies in these different products. And, you know, there's no one size fits all. It's just choosing the right product for the right project at the right time. Here you see a lot of detail. I think this is out of Fayetteville, but you can see the detail of the building, the structure, trees, even the signage. So extremely important communication tool here. Another virtual tool that we've been using for some years now are the KMZ files that a lot of you are probably familiar with. And these designs are easily exported from MicroStation into the KMZ file format, which can go into Google Earth or to ArcGIS. And this provides the public a way to easily reference the design in a tool that is free and universal. And this can be very useful in right-of-way discussions. The one thing I do want to point out is that we do put a disclaimer up that this is for information only, and we're not responsible for the accuracy of the design in that specific tool. And I think Dennis is going to show you a more advanced application of these files in his presentation. But 3D functionality exists as well. And this is an example from the Cape Fear Crossing project in my hometown, which is actually been removed from the STIP after our initial public outreach. This is an example, another example of an educational video. This is our most popular video to date for divergent diamond interchange. This shows the operation of a divergent diamond interchange. It is narrated, and to date is received over 960,000 views, right? So we're approaching 1 million views for this one video. And then one of my favorites are the video visualization hybrids. So they're similar, very similar to a photo simulation, except instead of a photo, you have video footage. And instead of a static rendering, you have an animation that is superimposed into that video footage. And this is an example from the I-540 ramp signals project here in Raleigh. This is actually a view from the Falls of the Neuse interchange looking west. And then we've been experimenting with virtual reality, and this is definitely a popular tool. This is an example from the I-440 Walnut to Wade project here in Raleigh, which is now under construction. But during the outreach, the team, we were able to, David and the team built the model. We, no, I'm sorry. We worked with RDV Systems to build this model. But the entire environment is live, and I think there were 11 or more interchanges or grade separations throughout the project study area. So we predefined certain areas, each of those different interchanges and grade separations. And so the public, when they came into the public hearing, were able to put their phone in these disposable goggles, and they were able to immerse themselves into the various areas that they had concerns with. So a very important communication tool there. Complete 540. This is an example. We've experimented with simulcasting or broadcasting traditional outreach efforts. This was, by broadcasting, we can make public involvement efforts more effective and efficient by providing opportunities to inform those who would otherwise be unable to participate in that process. This is an example from the design public hearing for Complete 540. The city of Raleigh actually sent their public access television crew out to record the entire hearing, and they aired it throughout the comment period on public access television. And this is a great thing about partnerships, and that to keep in mind that those municipalities are typically looking for content to air, and we just need to reach out and use this avenue more. And we're going to continue to build on these types of partnerships. Here's another example of simulcasting or broadcasting. This is the I-26 project in Asheville, North Carolina, where we broadcast the public hearing using Facebook Live. But the success of all these efforts are directly tied to successful marketing and advertising campaigns. And as I mentioned earlier, the #1 advertising tool by far these days with respect to reach and cost is social media. And just some quick fun facts from according to market.us, 83.3% of total active internet users are actively using social media. About 51% of the world's population has a social media account. And as of last year, 69% of the US population are active social media users. And then I talked a little bit about Nextdoor. Our comms office has an umbrella account for the department where our public information officers have access to, so that they can post regionally, locally, or even statewide. And the image you see is a statewide effort for trails, the trail outreach effort. If you look in the bottom corner, you can see that that post received almost 300,000 impressions. Again, that awareness, social media is really changing the game for us. Our total potential outreach with Nextdoor is we have access to almost 5.3 million households. Since having the account, we've communicated with almost 15,000 neighborhoods. And our volume is roughly 1 to 2 posts per week as we reserve the right to reserve the content for specific items that affect communities like public meetings, surveys, long-term detours, etc. And don't underestimate, and of course our web pages, but don't underestimate the power of radio. We run drive time ads during rush hour times where we have a captive audience. A lot of times they're riding through the project study area when they hear these ads. And they run from 6 to 10 in the morning and 3 to 7 in the evening. And then of course we have some of our more traditional advertising methods as well. But takeaways in closing, the tools that I discussed today are just a few in our toolbox. They represent the future of standard communication tools. But I would add that the future is actually now. The public's expectations are changing about the way that information and opportunities for interaction with public agencies should be provided. Citizens want, deserve, and expect transparency from their government agencies, and rightfully so. Increasing transparency will lead to a greater level of trust between the public and the agencies. Virtual public involvement tools like MetroQuest, publicinput.com, as well as broadcasting can make public involvement more effective and efficient by providing opportunities to engage those who would otherwise be unable to participate in the transportation planning and project development process. In addition, by making participation easier, more interactive, and more enjoyable for the public, more people are apt to take part in the process. We're able to reach a broader demographic and beyond those few motivated, passionate individuals that we talked about earlier. Another important aspect of virtual public involvement tools is that it allows people the opportunity and flexibility to participate on their own time, whether it's 12 noon or 12 midnight. People are increasingly relying on social media and virtual technology for their news, their information, and public discussion. And the public today is very comfortable providing feedback through a keyboard, what I call a social media society. But to that point, since going 100% virtual due to the pandemic, we have seen our participation numbers increase. Overall, the pre-recorded project informational videos have been extremely successful, and for several reasons. The videos allow us to control our message by having accurate information available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the outreach period. This provides the public the opportunity to participate on their own time. They are easily shared across a variety of media. People can share with their neighbors, friends, and family, and then provide input. They also allow us the ability to capture and inform commuters by utilizing geofencing and geotargeting. These videos are getting thousands of views, like, in some cases, over 10,000 views. And there's no traditional public meeting that has ever been able to inform that many residents. And I believe that they are popular because we live in a society where people love to consume video content. And I firmly believe today, and this is my opinion, but I believe it's true, that people would rather watch videos than read today. But finally, I want to leave you with one thought and tagline from our Everyday Counts 5 virtual public involvement initiative. And now, due to its popularity, Everyday Counts 6 VPI initiative, we've been extended due to its popularity for another 2 years. And that is, a 21st century transportation system needs to be built on the foundation of a 21st century public involvement strategy. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jamille. I really appreciate that. That was a exceptional presentation and very informative. I do have a couple questions for you. If you, for those that are maybe unfamiliar, can you describe a little more in detail about you mentioned a couple of times geofencing and geotargeting. Can you describe a little bit more about that for those that may not be familiar?
Right, so utilizing social media, geotargeting really comes down to like demographics, income. You can target your ads to go to certain populations. Geofencing is where you draw a virtual boundary around an area. You draw a virtual project study area. And so you're casting a virtual net. So everyone that drives through that virtual area, that virtual net, Next time they get on their social media platforms, the ad pops up. So again, it's a very effective way to capture commuters.
That's why I get all those ads all the time. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, so big business, they're using it all the time. So.
Gotcha. You mentioned this several times, and you even mentioned it just now in your answer. How has, I remember when, social media and just 5-10 years ago, social media and other virtual items came up. It was looked upon as not necessarily promoting equity, specifically in rural areas or with the elderly and so forth. How has that changed? And how has, especially with COVID, how has that possibly fast forwarded that change? I assume it's made things more equitable as more people have gotten on board with that.
Yeah, well, just through time and the adoption of technology, given those stats on mobile usage, smartphones, that's really been the game changer. COVID, the silver lining there is that virtual meetings and virtual engagement, I guess it accelerated the adoption. Just having a virtual meeting like this, a lot of people shied away from it, right? Because they felt like, well, I kind of need a small degree in IT to have a virtual meeting. And now you see how simple it is and how user-friendly, and we've become accustomed to it. But you still have some populations that they're not on the internet, right? But that's changing. It's broadband initiatives that are going on. So that's changing over time. But as I mentioned, through our online engagement, we have the ability to have landlines call in, and those are automatically transcribed into our virtual database. That's changing. And then when we send out notifications, we let people know if you do not have broadband access or comfortable, we can mail information out, right? So we're doing different things, but overall, we've been extremely successful. Again, a lot of the low-income communities, they're used to, they're on social media, and so by having those videos, we're reaching a broader demographic than what we would have in the past.
Gotcha. Oops. Last question on that front would be, and you mentioned, you've already mentioned it several times. You mentioned how that has accelerated through COVID. Do you see it reverting back some now that the things are loosening to some of the more in-person items, but maybe not all the way back, so to speak?
Well, I think the virtual tools are here to stay, right? I think it just provides us a lot more flexibility. Have a meeting with our management soon to discuss a return to in-person meetings or just having the option to. But for a lot of projects now, there won't be a need for a face-to-face public meeting. Some of the videos and some of the online tools that we're using, based on the area, scope and complexity of the project, the type of document really determines that too. We may be able to do just stay virtual. In other cases, we'll have the in-person meetings and traditional outreach paired with the informational videos, because I think a lot of people have become accustomed to just going online and providing their feedback and getting informed. They don't have to take time out of their day to go see us, it's the best show in town that night. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, but it's here to stay.
Awesome. Well, I do appreciate it. It was an incredible presentation, and I think I speak for everyone out there in the virtual engagement that we just had. That we do appreciate it. It was an incredible presentation. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we're going to move move on with the day. Thanks again to Jamille for that. While we're transitioning in the background, I just wanted to share a little information about Chapter 31 for all of our members out there and those around the country and around North America, since we have some folks from Canada joining us. August will be Chapter 31's Member Appreciation Month. With that, we are going to have several things to pop up that we are very excited about. So I've been told to tease those accordingly. So please keep your eye out on social media for us, whether it's on LinkedIn or on Twitter or so forth, as well as in our newsletter coming out as well. So please keep an eye out. We're looking forward to August being a great month for member appreciation. We're thankful for our members every month. We want to show them extra gratitude coming up in August. So just one more reminder for those that may have joined us late, as we are moving into our next speaker. If you haven't done so yet, there is a little cloud button at the top of your screen with Q&A. If you can just type your name in there. If you haven't done so yet, to make sure that we've got you, we'll have an attendee list, but we're just double checking things there. And also, if you have any questions for our next speaker, type those in there, and I'll be sure to share as many as I can at the end of that. So with that, I want to move on to our next speaker, Dennis Jernigan. He is a professional engineer with the North Carolina Department of Transportation, where he is the Deputy Chief Engineer for Highway Operations with the North Carolina Turnpike Authority, and is in charge of the construction of the Complete 540. Prior to his role with he served as part of this role. He served with NCDOT Division 5, which is the area, the division around the Triangle, North Carolina, Raleigh, Durham, in that area. And there he has nearly 30 years of experience with NCDOT as a roadway construction engineer for the Central Construction Unit, resident engineer, and assistant engineer, and so forth. He has a bachelor's degree from NC State. As you can tell, we have plenty of Woolpackers on this today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis. So thanks, Dennis, for joining us.
Thank you, Frank. Just want to make sure you can hear me before I get started.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Catherine's going to be loading our presentation up here in just a second. While she's doing that, I just want to thank you for the invitation. We are excited for the opportunity to come share this update on the Complete 540 project. It's a project that is sorely needed for the area, and a lot of people are looking forward to driving on it. So thank you for the invitation. So as we go to the next slide, I just want to briefly tell you a little bit about the Turnpike Authority. And we are about more than just operating and maintaining toll facilities. If you've ridden on any of our facilities, you know we like aesthetics and other amenities. We want a great driver experience, but we're also constantly looking for ways to improve safety and the driver experience. We have dedicated motorist assistance patrol, dedicated highway patrol, and we also have 24-hour monitoring of all our facilities. We are involved in pilot projects involving pavement marking, wrong-way driver prevention, autonomous and connected vehicles, and most recently, we are piloting a new technology called Pay by Car. You may have seen a local news story about that, but it's a non-toll pilot program to use a transponder for touch-free payment, which is important to a lot of people these days, at gas and retail drive-through lanes. But why else might you need a transponder like the one you see on the top right of your screen there, which is free, by the way? Well, one reason is it can save you up to 35% on tolls in North Carolina. But as we go to the next slide, another reason is North Carolina has a rapidly growing population. And Jamille showed a screenshot of NC Moves 2050, and he talked about that in 2040 and some other things. NC Moves 2050 is a long-range transportation plan, and it estimates, the study for that one estimated what North Carolina's population will be in 2050, and it's anticipated to increase by 4 million people. And that's a lot of people that are looking for ways to travel. So any agency that has anything to do with transportation is looking ahead and trying to figure out how to meet those transportation demands. And the projects you see here on this map, the one that just left the screen, are some of the facilities that either have been or are into planning or under construction to help meet some of North Carolina's current and future transportation needs. And just to let you know, the Turnpike Authority evaluates the feasibility of a toll facility at the request of a local government. they look at things like this 2050 study and their needs and their funding, and they sometimes ask the Turnpike Authority to evaluate the viability of some facilities as tolled to get them quicker. And if we're going to put a toll facility in place, it has to be able to repay the financing as well as cover operations and maintenance costs. That's something really important about toll facilities. A lot of people don't know it, that our toll revenue actually covers our maintenance costs and our toll collections costs. But the projects you see here, and I won't go over them, but we have over $6 billion either under construction or in the planning stages currently, and those are constantly changing their dynamic. But that's one of the reasons why you might need transponder here in North Carolina. So the next screen is an agenda, and it looks like a lot, and there is a lot of information here. And so let's go ahead and jump right in. The next map you're going to see is 540 Outer Loop around Raleigh. Now the gray portion is open to traffic, and you see that that's a good portion, it's a little over half. The blue project is under construction, and then the green project is the last piece that's scheduled to be let in a few years. So our next slide is going to zoom into phase one, which is the blue portion. And what you're going to see here is that phase one is made up of 3 different projects. The left side of the map there is where the current facility ends. It's the south end of our Triangle Expressway. And so the first project, and we have those labeled by our steps, our step numbers at the bottom of the screen there. You see those R2721A and B and R2828. And so the A project extends from the end of the existing facility to near Pier Solid Road. And the B project goes from there to just east of US 401 near Garner. And then the big project, R2828, extends from there over to US 70 and I-40. And then the next slide that you're going to see actually shows where our interchanges are, our new interchanges in phase one are going to be. We're building 6 brand new interchanges. And then number 1 on the left end, we're finishing out that interchanges. Currently got 2 of 4 movements because it's an all traffic exit there. So as we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about our pre-construction activities and our procurement process. So on the next slide, how does the Turnpike Authority decide where a toll road will be built? And I mentioned that a minute ago about getting requests from local municipalities. So the STIP law, the Strategic Transportation Improvements Law, and Jamille talked about those a little when he talked about 3.0 and 4.0 and 5.0. So that's a new data-driven process called prioritization that happens every 2 years. And it's based on public feedback. DOT divisions get to put in scores, and then the local metropolitan and rural planning organizations also get to help score those as well. And again, that's local government requests have a lot of input into what gets scored there. So as we transition to the next slide, at the same time this is going on, if we're considering a facility, our finance team is hard at work. So traffic and revenue study is a key part of financing, and there are only 2 firms currently recognized to do these studies, and they're CDM Smith and Stantec. And so we do a planning level study, which is shown here. It's not as detailed, but then as we're kind of getting close to a project and refining things, we also do an investment grade study, and they determine the viability of a facility as being tolled or not. And again, I mentioned tolls not only pay back to financing, but they also cover operations and maintenance. You know, if something's important, you'll hear it twice. But they also cover toll collections and customer service costs. We have customer service centers associated with each one of our facilities. And so we currently have one in Charlotte and one over in the Morrisville area to coincide with the 2 facilities we have open. And the next slide is part of our planning process. It's a cover of our record of decision, or ROD, on the Complete 540 project, which here was issued in June of 2018. Now it's going to transition to another slide where you get to see some information about a formal survey study that was completed for the 6 species that you see here on the bottom. Those were affected, so we had to do that study. And then there were 2 others where formal surveys were not required because 540 was not going to have an adverse impact on them. But because of these concerns by certain folks, a lawsuit was filed in May of 2018. Now, if you're paying close attention there, you're going to ask the same question that I first had, was how do you file a lawsuit before the ROD? Because typically that's that's sort of the line in the sand when a lawsuit gets filed. But actually what happened there was the biological opinion was issued, and once that was issued in May, then the lawsuit was filed against the biological opinion. And then once the ROD was filed, then DOT and FHWA were added to the lawsuit. But settlement discussions began in March 2019. We had an agreement executed by August of 2019, and it allows the project to move forward with a covenant not to sue. And it also applies to the whole corridor. Even though phase 1 is under construction, it also applies to phase 2. So you'll see on the next slide some of the commitments that were in that agreement. DOT and Turnpike Authority actually made 27 total commitments. There are 16 that are not listed here, but a few of those are that we retain 50% of the remnants that we acquire. We establish a mussel propagation facility, which you see next to the bottom here on this slide. We have equipment. The construction equipment is not to idle for more than 30 minutes, and that's not just for Complete 540, that's for all projects. And that was directed by a memo dated December 30th, 2020 by the chief engineer that was sent out statewide. So the next slide is going to show you one unique thing that we did during procurement was to hold an industry forum and a DBE workshop. And we intentionally did this together. If you look at the schedule on the left side of this screen, you're going to see that the DBE workshop occurred in the morning, and then we transitioned into the industry forum in the afternoon. And we did that for networking purposes because we were targeting with these 3 projects from a construction standpoint at least $75 million for DBE contracts and small business contracts. And actually and I'm going to explain this in a minute, we actually had a prime consultant who was a right-of-way consultant. He's a DBE on one project, he's a sub on another. So based on what he ended up with, we actually ended up with over $80 million in commitments for DBEs and small business firms. And the photo that you see here on the screen is a actual photo of the DBE forum from the back. It's not looking toward the speaker, but just to give you a little bit of breadth about the attendance, we had almost 200 people in 75 firms. It was very well attended. The next slide is just a brief information about our 2828. It was let first, and it's actually the eastern project. And that sounds a little odd because the project ends in the west. But the development of the R2721 projects were a little farther along. And so we let 2828 first to give it time to catch up to the other projects, which is one of the reasons. We had other reasons as well, and I'll share those. But anyway, this gives you an idea of the timeline from the notice to proceed to completion. On this, the largest project, the bids were less than 1% apart. And there we go, that animation shows that. I've been in this business almost just a couple of weeks shy of 30 years. I've never seen a project of this magnitude with bidders so close. Everybody was within $4 million on a $400 million job. It was incredible. But we staggered the lettings on these projects to make sure the contractors and subcontractors could make educated decisions as to whether to pursue the next contract based on their work capacity. And you'll see that exactly on this slide right here. And so you see kind of the dates and the progression, and the first animation is going to show you that we actually had already issued the second draft RFP on R2828 when the second project was advertised. And then the next animation is going to show that at one time we had all 3 projects concurrently in the procurement stages. And then next you'll see that the price proposals for the first letting occurred about 2 months before the technical proposals were due for the second bid opening. So when I was talking about having that time to make that decision, a contractor on the 2828 can say, hey, I've got all the work I can stand. We won this project. I don't need to bid on the other 2. Or no, I missed it. I need to go after the other 2 to continue to pursue. And the last animation shows that there was about a 5-week window between opening bids on the second project and submitting for the last one. So it really gave firms a chance to make that educated decision and make sure they didn't overcommit themselves. But what we end up with, you see on the next slide, was we had joint ventures on all 3 projects. You see those here, Branch Civil and Flatiron got both the A and the B jobs, and Lane Blythe had the R2828 job. There were 3 different designers, even though we had the same joint venture on the A and the B job. Gannett Fleming on A, HDR on B, and then of course we had a third designer, WSP, on the 2828 job. But to date, we reviewed almost 1,000 submittals. That's for plans and materials. As of December, haven't got an updated number, the contractors were employing just the primes, 350 people with 95 subcontractors working in almost 400 pieces of equipment. So a major employer in the area. And these projects, this corridor has continued work through COVID. So we're able to continue pursuing construction. Also, we coordinated with local governments and Wake County for bicycle, pedestrian, and infrastructure planning. So we made sure long-range plans were included in our designs. And speaking of design, Our next slide is going to show you the plan cover sheet for the A project. And you'll notice by the orange arrows there, we have interchanges at Holly Springs Road, and we're completing the interchange at NC 55 where the existing facility ends. And the red that you see on the right is where Kildare Farm Road actually ties into the south, which you see by the leftmost red arrow. And then we're rotating that to tie in north of the interchange. We got to get that connection out of the interchange. And we're going to have, Jamille mentioned DDIs earlier, diverging diamond interchanges, and we're building one here at Holly Springs Road. And so we've got a visualization here, which ties in perfectly to what Jamille was saying. In addition to what's on the DOT website, we have a project visualization, and it shows people who may not be familiar with DDIs or who live in the area and just want to see what it looks like, what the final configuration is going to look like. So you see the new interchange there. You see how Kildare Farm Road used to tie in sort of on the bottom of the screen, and now it's being relocated to the top north of the interchange, about 1,000 feet to the north, across from Sandcroft Drive. And that is located on our website. And again, as Jamille mentioned earlier, we have a lot of people that we refer to this to look at it. We actually have a flyover through the entire project, through the corridor. And anytime it gets to an interchange, it stops and kind of hovers and goes around like this particular video did right here. Our next slide is going to show you the plan cover sheet for the B project. And we have interchanges at Bells Lake Road and US 401 as indicated by the orange arrows. And for those of you familiar with the area, on the bottom right of that plan sheet, you will see Donnybrook Road, which ties in. It's kind of a north entrance, if you will, to Wake Tech if you cross 401. And we're actually realigning that to the south to get it away from the interchange. And we're also realigning Donnybrook on the other end because it's an offset intersection with Optimus Farm Road. So for those of you in the area, it's going to be a few changes to Donnybrook Road. And then our next slide is a plan cover sheet for R2828. And we're adding interchanges at Old Stage Road, NC 50, and I-40 and US 70. And I will mention to you, if you look on the right side there and notice the complexity at the 540, 40, 70 interchange, that was affectionately named before I got the turnpike as the dream catcher. And you can see why. You notice the things you put in the window that people call dream catchers and whatnot. To me, it looks like a lopsided starfish, but it had already been named when I got here. But you may notice, you may want to ask, why do we need such an elaborate interchange? So the next slide is going to show you our 2016 no-build scenario traffic numbers. And what you'll notice is you've got 83,000 people at the max on I-40 and 26,000 on US 70. The next slide shows you the 2016 build scenario. So you get an idea of what happens if we build 540. So you see that 540 eases congestion on I-40, and it also connects more people on US 70. So it gives them another avenue and gives people more of an access into Johnston County through US 70. And then our next slide shows our pre-COVID projected opening volumes. So 2023 build volume. Both I-40 and US 70 volumes are up more than 10% in just 7 years. And again, 540 is helping to carry some of that volume. You see upwards around 24,000 vehicles per day in this particular projection. And then our next slide shows our design year, our 2040 volumes. All three facilities are up significantly for volumes, and we need an interchange that can handle the convergence of 3 facilities with all that traffic. It's a lot of vehicles. So our next slide shows you that rendering. You saw the plan sheet, but this is actually a rendering of our turbine style interchange. And we call it turbine style because a true turbine is the intersection of 2 major facilities. We have 3. And so to handle all those volumes, the traffic that I was showing you earlier, we need something creative and we need something that's going to be efficient. So this was the design that our pre-construction consultant came up with, but then our design build consultant actually changed it. He modified it from a 3-level to a 2-level, which saves a lot of berth work. And he did that by putting some of the movements inside the turbine and pulled some movements out. But this interchange takes up 481 acres. There's 37 acres of pavement just in phase 1. And from the bridge you see on the south to the bridge you see on the north, there's 5/8 of a mile in diameter. So I call it a roundabout in the sky. But there are 6 bridges that cross I-40. You may notice if you're familiar with this area, the US 70 bridges have been removed, and that traffic was put into the turbine to make operations more efficient. So you may notice also too, there's 2 different colors of pavement. So the pavement areas that look to be paved, the grayish color pavement, they're going to be paved under phase 1 and put into use under phase 1. And the pavement areas that look to be the soil color, the tan color, they're actually going to be opened up and used in phase 2. But one of the other unique features of our 2828 is a pair of bridges that they're being built on a radial design. And so what happened here was one of the bridges could have been shorter than the other hydraulically, but that would have resulted in a wall between the bridges, which is a maintenance concern. And I'm going to be looking after this facility after this is built, and so that's a concern for me. And also because we like aesthetics, and it just didn't look right to have one bridge much shorter than the other. And so this was a compromise. This was something the design build team came up with. It maintained the aesthetics from a maintenance standpoint. It met all our needs. And so it's very unique, though. You don't typically see these built that way. So I thought it was a good compromise. And now we're going to talk about right-of-way, which I know is of particular interest to this group. So the next slide is a cover sheet from our preliminary design consultant, who is H.W. Lochner. And our 2721 was originally designed as one project. So you see the 2 layers, if you will, here of plan sheets. But we split it into 2 projects, as I mentioned earlier. And we also decided to pursue it as a hybrid design build. And what do I mean by that? Well, a true design build, you give preliminary plans to a design build team, they take it, finalize the design, they go by right away, they run with it. But Lochner, we asked Lochner to go ahead and complete the right-of-way plan. And we decided to advertise right-of-way contracts for each section of the A and the B, and you see the split here, to try and expedite utility relocation and construction. So the next slide shows you a letter that we advertised, and we held a pre-bid in the summer of 2018. And it was important to me, as important to Turnpike, for us to have this pre-bid because our expectations were going to be a little bit different than traditional right-of-way. And so we wanted to put those out there. We wanted to let people know what they were so that they could pursue it appropriately. And the next slide shows a cover of our 2018 request for letters of interest. But you'll notice with the next animation that we put all of the normal right-of-way activities, and we specified in bold and all caps there, all the normal right-of-way pursuit activities into 2 contracts, one for A and one for B. And the only exception was surveying. Surveying had to be pursued as a limited service contract. So we had to get a surveying contract established for each one of these, one for the A and the one for the B. But why did we do it this way? Well, instead of having to coordinate the various activities for right-of-way acquisition, the appraisals and the asbestos and that kind of thing, we chose to make it a one-stop shop. We wanted to put it in the hands of the right-of-way consultant, let them manage those activities. We felt it would be more efficient. They could better organize. They knew what was coming. They knew when properties were getting close to the appraisals were coming in, when the negotiations were drawing to an end, they could go ahead and set things up. And so that's why we set it up this way. Now on the next slide, you're going to see an excerpt from an article that ran in the Triangle Business Journal. And the article highlighted, it was about Vistibution. And Vistibution was our prime right-of-way consultant on the B project. And it has quotes from Clarence Mann, who's the owner of Vistibution. Now, you may see in the 3rd paragraph my name in here. That's not self-serving. Ignore my name. That's not the point of why I put this on the slide. The reason why was, you'll see with the first animation, Clarence's quote outlines that it was practically a turnkey right-of-way contract. He says here, our job was to do the negotiations, the appraisals, make the offer, and then do the environmental work afterwards, the asbestos work and that kind of thing. So he got it. That's what it was supposed to be. And at the pre-bid conference and the pre-construction conferences after they're awarded, there were certain messages that were conveyed to the prospective and the successful bidders in those 2 meetings. One was, give me reasonable appraisals. An appraiser is not doing me any favors if they're not following protocols and giving me a lowball appraisal that I can't defend. And this came about because of, again, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've sat across the table from attorneys and property owners who said, I had an appraisal that said that I could manipulate my existing office building, and I never spoke to an appraiser. An appraiser never visited the site, and they actually had not visited the site, but they made these recommendations, and I'm sitting in a mediation trying to defend it, or they lowballed a number thinking they were helping keep project costs down, but it was something that couldn't be defended. That's not doing me any favors. I need realistic appraisals, and my goal, as I conveyed to them, was I want an appraisal that if things go to litigation, I can sit across the table from somebody and they say, well, I really didn't find any issue with your appraisal, I just didn't like your number. We can always talk about that. The second thing is be sensitive to the owners. This is their property. In some cases, their homes and maybe even their home places are being disrupted and they're having to leave. I know sentimentality is not compensable, but it is a real emotion, and people react positively or negatively to how that sentiment is treated. And it's very important to us that we want people to feel like they had a good experience. If an agent and owner do not make good connections, sometimes it just causes problems. That has nothing to do, it's no reflection on the agent, but sometimes people just don't mesh. And one of the things that we established early on, if that happens and people just don't happen to have that connection, switch agents. And we did that in a couple of cases out here, and it actually worked out well. And one of the things that I did was to make myself available to talk with owners. Sometimes they just want to talk with somebody else. They want explanations. They want an engineer to tell them why things are like they are. Sometimes they want things changed. And we were actually able to do that. Sometimes we made plan changes. People had very legitimate concerns, and we had to address those. And sometimes there were things we could do it one way or do it another. It didn't make a difference. And we were able to make people happy by making some plan changes. And sometimes people just wanted to vent, but we listened to them all. We wanted them to know they had been heard, that people were listening, they were empathizing with their concerns. And as Clarence says here in his second quote, have you heard anybody fussing or complaining? No. And it's because both our right-of-way consultants, they listened, they went out, they expressed good compassion, good empathy with these property owners. And that's what we wanted. We wanted people to feel like, regardless of whether they liked the facility, they wanted to move or didn't want to move, that they were treated fairly and that people worked with them well. And that's the end part of Clarence's quote here, to make sure clients are taken care of. And so I applaud both firms for their work on the project with their efforts with the property owners out here. I felt like both of them did a really good job of that. So moving on to the next slide, one of the innovative things we did here was a right-of-way tool. And what this is this is a login screen, and we put all the information from the right-of-way process in one place. So when you logged in, this is what you saw, or this was the login screen. But when you logged in, this is what you got to. So at the top, you see the project corridor, and the parcels are listed at the bottom. Now you will see a big white box there. I blocked out the values in the middle right and on all the other screens because they're not relevant to this discussion, and I didn't want people's personal information out there. But in the next slide, when you zoom in on the map, you see that the parcels are color coded. Now what that does is the color coding gives an idea at a quick glance as to the status of the parcel. So orange means the appraisal has been ordered. Yellow means we're in negotiations. Blue is settled but not closed. And green is either settled, condemned, or we have right of entry. It means we have legal access. And so this is easy for anybody associated with the project, including the contractor. We gave him access to look at it to see are we close to access? Are we in negotiations? Are we still waiting on an appraisal and that kind of thing? And so he could look at it at a glance and make sure that he had access before he started work. Now on the bottom left, you see a blue pencil. Next click, there we go. And if you select on that pencil, after you've identified a parcel, you're going to get something like this. And so what you see is there's a lot of information in these drop downs, and the drop down arrows are on the right. You see engineering, legal, appraisal, negotiation, the kind of things you normally see and think about when you think about acquisition. And so this gives you just an idea of the different categories that we had. But then the next screen, if you click on as we go to the next screen, this is negotiation. So we clicked on one just to give you a screenshot here. And it gives you an idea of the vast amount of information that was available and the different things, the different types of information is entered. It can be viewed in real time by everyone once it's entered. It doesn't have to wait till midnight to refresh or anything like that. And once you change the status, the system automatically changes the parcel color. So you see it 2 seconds after I change it or somebody else changes it. And the document database, actually, you see a hyperlink there to SharePoint. There's actually a SharePoint site that houses all the documents that would be associated with the acquisition process. So the example here is the negotiations tab that you see at the bottom. So the diary and other relevant documents that we stored in this SharePoint site. And these are the folders that you would see if you went to that location. It's separate from the right-of-way tool, but it's all tied together. So having all the documents in place helps anybody who's trying to settle the claim and even do research years from now, as opposed to having to track down an agent or track down an appraiser or whoever you're looking for. I personally, and I've actually used this already, if I'm in a mediation and somebody says the agent promised something, I can pull up the negotiation diary And I've actually already used that for that purpose because we had an agent who passed away and we were in negotiation and they said, well, the agent promised me this. I pulled up the negotiation diary and there was actually some conversation about that. So it's very helpful. I didn't have to worry about tracking it down or who do I call since that person's no longer with us. Now, the next slide that you're going to see is an example I was telling you about the color coding. We use GIS mapping and the color coding does provide a quick glance as to the status. But an example here, if I wanted to see if parcels 200 and 202 were available, I can see here that 202 is clear, it's green, 200 is still in negotiations, it's blue. So again, just that quick of an access or a glance. And the next slide also shows that this system generates customized reports. So we had the latitude to have the code writers generate the reports that we felt like we would need. And I do want to give the props here to this system. Our GEC consultant with Turnpike HNTB had used this system for the Durham Orange Light Rail system. And so when we started right-of-way acquisition, when we decided to take over the A and the B acquisition, they offered to customize it to us, to our needs for the 540 project. And we actually did it for all three, even though it's a true design build on 2828. So they were allowed because they had written it. We had the latitude to change it to meet our needs. The original home street had railroad data on it. I really wanted something with more project roadway related. So every ounce of detail that we need to be changed could change. So a few of the reports that you see here at the top, this is the report B. Everybody's probably familiar with that. You have to submit it weekly, and we used it a lot on this project. If you enter the data as it happens in real time, then getting a report B at the end of the week when you have to report it is just a function of literally of clicking a button and generating a report. There's an access report here if a contractor really wants to verify, if he doesn't want to look at the colors and he wants to know where every parcel is where he can work. That's there. There's a remnant report. I mentioned earlier, we made a commitment to retain half our remnants. There's a report that we can show at any point in time to anybody. These are the remnants that we currently have. The next slide is going to show you the filters. We have many filters that, just like any Excel spreadsheet, right there, that shows you what those are if we wanted to filter by any particular information. And then finally on this, we had the benefits, just the benefits of being able to have this tool available, everything in one place, real time, everybody sees it at one time. I can't stress it enough. I know there's a system that's being talked about with DOT, and I know they're going to go to a system similar to this. And everybody had a chance to sort of give it a test run. Now, it's not going to be this system particularly, but it was a good opportunity for everybody to have a chance to use it. We also had a Google Earth tool, and Jamille mentioned that. It's actually available on our website if you have Google Earth. It's got a KMZ file that's tied to the project, and that assists many residents who want to see where the properties are relative to the project, but a lot of us don't have Google Earth. So one of our young engineers created the tool you're going to see on the next slide, and this is a short video, and we're just going to give you just a couple of the features about it. So the colors that you see there, the reason all those colors are there those are municipal boundaries. There's a lot of projects, or a lot of municipalities that are either in or adjacent to this corridor. And you see the legends there with the particular colors if you were to zoom in. And this also, as you can see, goes over to phase 2. We're going to look at phase 1. So basically what's happening now is they're punching in an address and they want to see the proximity to the project. And so the map zooms in and you see two different colors of right of way. You see green and blue, and then she'll zoom out so you can kind of get a better feel for how close it is to the project. And you see there the blue and the green, that the blue is controlled access right of way and the green is just a regular right of way. So that's the purpose of zooming out there. But now we're going to punch in Wake Tech Community College out there on US 401. And one of the features of this particular tool is it has a measuring tool. So if I wanted to say, I want to know how far it is from my driveway to the ramp, I pull up the measuring tool that you see here. I specify that I want to know it in feet, and then I click, just like using Google Maps or any other online tool. You click from there, measure to the ramp, and there you go. You're about 2,000 feet from the ramp. And so this is available online. It went live Friday before last, so we just have put it out there, but we did do some beta testing with it before and made some improvements to it. But we also show municipal paths, ped culverts and things of that on it. And so feel free to use it. And again, it's an effort, as Jamille had said earlier, to try and put as much information as we can out there in the hands of our users. They can use this themselves and let us know if they've got any questions with it. But we had two primary impacts to right-of-way in the corridor. And one type of right-of-way impact was a map-back claim. So in 1987, the North Carolina General Assembly passed the Corridor Protection Act, which was an effort to keep the cost of land reasonable and prevent development until a project was ready for construction. North Carolina was not unique. There were about 12 states that had this kind of law in place. But in 2016, a group of Forsyth County property owners sued DOT all the way to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And the court ruled that the law was unfair and unconstitutional because the owners had not been compensated for something that had been taken. And in 2019, the North Carolina General Assembly repealed the MAP Act with House Bill 131. And then later on in May 2020, another case went to the North Carolina Supreme Court, and it was Chappell versus NCDOT, where DOT had appealed some of the decisions in a case that the Chappells had filed in 2014. And one of the issues in the MAP Act claims is whether DOT retained its condemnation or quick take rights. And so since that was an outstanding issue while we were doing some of the acquisition out here, access to some of the MAP Act parcels took a little bit longer to obtain. And the second issue that affected right away was, of course, the pandemic. Courthouses closed. We couldn't file condemnations. We couldn't record settlements during one of the periods. Wake County went to an e-record system, and we had to, some people were used to that. Some people had to adjust to that. And some people just didn't want to go they didn't want to meet face to face. Some people on our side, some of the property owners, especially some of our elderly citizens that were on the project, they didn't want to meet face to face. I understand that. And the governor issued a stay-at-home directive. So even though we had some properties that had closed, we had vacate notices, DOT rightfully decided to not enforce vacate notices during a pandemic. And it would have also violated the governor's order. When he's telling you to stay at home, we can't come in and say, yeah, we heard him, but you got to leave. So we rightfully decided, DOT rightfully decided to not enforce those vacate notices. Now, if people wanted to relocate, if their house was built or their new property was available, they could make that decision, but it wasn't one that was being enforced. We didn't make them leave. So next we're going to go to construction. And the next slide is we're going to talk about first is archaeology. One of the unique things about this project, there are actually two things on this slide. We had one grave relocation. There were two graves, one site. And they were from the late 1800s, early 1900s. You see that headstone there on the right. But we had, from an archaeology standpoint, we have an archaeological unit at DOT. And the result of the survey for this corridor was we identified over 155 sites. And this particular site here was between Sauls Road and Highland Church Road. There were many artifacts and tools, all date from about 1,500 years ago. And as the archaeologists went deeper, they actually found more artifacts. They call them points, stone tools with sharp edges from the Archaic period, which is 6,000, 8,000 BC, so about 2,000 years ago. And the next slide is actually one of those that it actually made the news. You see the top right of that slide. This is called a gorget, and it was worn sort of like a necklace, like an adornment. And it's really interesting to think that you're holding something that somebody used as somewhat of a prize or a piece of jewelry from 10,000 years ago, which, no, we didn't hold it. We're not allowed to hold it, but you could hold it. You could be next to it. So some of the other things we dealt with on this project, the next slide is 2 power transmission line relocations. They are both complete. The next slide, we had 9 petroleum transmission line crossings with 2 different companies. All of those are complete. One was a 3-year process, but it was a good partnership. We really, our utility contractors, our utility owners have really worked well with us through this project, and we're very appreciative of that. The next slide, you're actually going to see some of those other normal utilities, and you see some of those at work here. You see the trucks at the bottom. And the next slide, our work is very close to our neighbors. We're going very, very close to some of the neighborhoods out here, and I'm going to speak to some of those coordination efforts in just a minute. The next slide mentions Wake Tech. I mentioned that through the video earlier. We coordinated early with them, and the pandemic allowed us to do some work that avoided impacts to staff and students because they were actually out of class. And so we changed some of our scheduling around and got some of that work done to minimize our impact later. And as we move to the next slide, we work with local municipalities for long-range planning of their wet infrastructure, water, sewer. And what you see here in the middle of the screen is an encasement for one of those, for a future for one of those municipalities. And our next slide shows you that we had 52 bridges and 33 culverts on this particular corridor. So a lot of structure work. Our consultant CEI team is shown on the next slide. It's actually a team. It's not just one consultant, it's a team of people. And then their organizational chart is shown on the next slide. So you can see we have a lot of people who are overseeing the construction work out here. And some of our utility partners are shown on the next slide. And I said earlier, and it has been a partnership. This has been one of the best partnerships from a utility standpoint of any project I've worked on in my 30 years. And I did see Carol Lloyd from Duke as an attendee earlier. She's actually been one of the people we work with for ensuring Duke's right-of-way needs were met on these projects. So thank you, Carol, for your efforts there as well. Our next slide to show you some construction photos is an aerial photo at the end of the existing Triangle Expressway looking west. So we're looking back into the existing facility. And you notice in the center and left of the photo, there's a temporary loop that parallels the existing loop. And the reason we need that's going to be obvious when we zoom in on the ongoing bridge work here. In this closer view, you see that the piles have been driven for the indents. The median bent has already been built. But you'll notice that when we extend that lane, which is the eastbound 540 lane, it actually crosses that existing loop. And so we need to get that traffic out of the way so we can build this bridge, so we can build this roadway. And so that explains why we have that detour. So the next slide is actually going to be the same vantage point, but it's looking in the other direction. We're looking east, if you're familiar with the areas, toward East William Street near Holly Springs and Apex. So you can see that temporary loop in the bottom left of the photo. And then you can see the corridor in the top right, just kind of bearing off to the right. And as we zoom in, you're going to see the same progress at East Williams that we saw at NC 55. Invent piles have been drilled and driven, and these piles are going to carry the bridges for 540 over East William Street. The next construction photo is west of Westlake, and it's looking toward the east, towards Bells Lake Road. I like this photo because it shows, if you look across Westlake, the roadway section with the vegetation is starting to look like a roadway. You see the median, you see the lanes. This is also one of 8 locations where we resolved a conflict with Colonial Pipeline. You can see that going across at an angle there. And the next photo is actually at the next road up, looking back. It's at Bells Lake Road. We're looking back toward Westlake. You can see the median and the roadway that I was just talking about. And the box culvert to the right will carry the eastbound and westbound lanes of 540, and the one on the left is going to carry the off-ramp from eastbound 540 to Bells Lake. There's going to be an interchange here. And our next photo is at US 401. A lot of folks in this area are familiar with this. Wake Tech is in the top right, and there's going to be an interchange here. 2 culverts on the east side of 401 at Old McCullers have already been completed. On the right side of the photo, you see Donnybrook Road. I mentioned that tie-in to 401 earlier on when we were talking about where the project is located. And our next slide actually spins to the right and looks to the south. And you can see the corridor that we cleared for Donnybrook Road. And it's going to tie in Donnybrook to Wake Tech, to their entrance just north of the Chandler Ridge Apartments. The next slide, actually, we're jumping all the way to the end. We're at I-40 and we're looking east. And it's primarily to show the aesthetic features. You notice the dogwood emblems there, the segmental column supports. And also, if you look in the bottom right, you see some brickwork there that we've already begun. All of our MSC walls and our noise walls use real brick. And I mentioned some stats on this interchange. One of the ones I didn't mention earlier, there are 13 bridges in this interchange and 9 of those are under construction. And this is a video of 40. You see those bridges in the top right there. Those are the US 70 bridges that we're going to take out of service. Sometimes a video just does a little better justice than a photo. As we spin around to the east here, you're going to see US 70 that's taken off there to the top right. You see the 3 bridges on the bottom side, the south side of the turbine that you may remember from the visualization, and another bridge there that kind of takes off that you can see that will join traffic to US 70. And then as we continue to spin around there, you'll see some of our ramp work that ties into I-40 East. So now let's talk about community outreach. And I agree with something Jamille said very early in his presentation, and that is public involvement is critical. When we enjoy talking with and meeting our new neighbors along the project, we were already doing that prior to COVID, and not just in the public meetings. I've sat in people's dining rooms, I've sat at their kitchen tables, I've stood in their yards, as have some of our CEI staff and some of our pre-construction staff. And so again, we wanted to listen, but one of the things that's important, we wanted to make sure people received the latest and most accurate information. And you know what happens? We've all played that game. A friend tells something and whispers it to somebody else and whispers it to something else, and by the time it gets down the line, it's not what it started out to be. But if we're out there talking with people, we know that they're hearing accurate information. They're getting it, the very latest and the very most accurate information they can get. So these are some of the stakeholders that we have and continue to communicate with. You see the residents there on the left. Emergency services, anytime we have changes in traffic patterns, of course, we want them to alter their response routes. Federal agencies, always talking with FHWA and our federal partners. And our outstanding communications team, researched the most effective ways we could continue our outreach. And we tried a few different methods when COVID first hit us and the pandemic and the lockdown happened. And so we kind of honed in on some things that really worked well with us. And this slide summarizes some of our outreach efforts. And you're going to see some of the same things that Jamille mentioned. Since the pandemic began, this is only since then, not taking into account what we did before, you see those numbers there on the left. We have in 2020 and 2021, we've had 34 meetings and over 1,000 people. We've already exceeded last year's meeting totals through the first 5 months of this year, and we're already booking presentations into September. So people want to hear, they want that information. You see the middle column there that we've sent out 12,000 postcards and the 20 next door posts, and Jamille, actually 22, and Jamille mentioned those. And we try to tailor those to the areas of the projects where certain activities will occurring or they're occurring for the first time. And you see on the right there, we responded to almost 1,000 calls and emails last year and more than that through the first quarter of this year as far as on pace. We're actually on a higher pace to communicate with around 3 people per day. And that's not including people who reach out to us directly or follow-ups that we've spoken with people before. Our next slide shows you 2 other resources that are available on the website. The top left is an interactive map where you can go online, you can click on one of these drums. A pop-up box shows you what's going on, how long it's going to last, when it's expected to be completed. And then the bottom right is actually a noise wall map. A lot of questions we get are about noise walls. And so this is on the R2828 project where the noise study has been completed, balloting has been done, and this is a way for people to go online and look for themselves where the noise walls are going to be. And the last couple of things I'll share with you, we've had some publicity about the project. There's a lot of good things to talk about. It's a lot of benefit to this project. This was actually an interview, a virtual interview that the senior managing editor of Roads and Bridges did with our chief engineer, Roger Rochelle. And then that interview somewhat led to 2 magazine articles. One of the next ones you'll see is the civil and structural engineer. Roger wrote a byline article here. He only had a page and a half, but he put a lot of information in there. If you haven't read it, you get a lot of stats from this article about the project. But then Roads and Bridges actually did a feature article, much wider scope, a lot of good information, and they kind of went through the stages from pre-construction to right away to various stages for their administration. This is a widely read magazine, a national magazine. It's great to be in it, but it's quite an honor to be on the cover. So we were very, very honored to be featured on the cover. And what I'll close with, one of the things that I've been in construction 30 years, and one of the reasons I like doing it is because you never know what you're going to run into. There's always some unique things. We actually had a house out here that we had a demo that had a beehive in it. So to maintain the pollinator population, we called a beekeeper to come out and work on that. We worked with the North Carolina Native Plant Society. They have volunteers that come out, they relocate endangered plants before a project is cleared. I mentioned the mussel propagation facility and the geotechnical work, but our executive director always says it's great to give people time back in their lives. And that's what this project's going to do. But it's always interesting. You never know what you're going to see when you show up to work on a Saturday morning and you see something like this. I know people move houses and they retain houses all the time. But if you look on the left side, they actually had to do clearing to get this house down the road. So it's a very interesting move. This is a bit larger house than I'm used to seeing moved down a 2-lane road. But anyway, it's never dull, but it's a great project. We appreciate the opportunity to present today. If you want to find out more information, the next slide is going to show you our project website. If you got questions, there's an 800 number that's maintained by a consultant. And you see our Twitter handles there at the bottom if you want to follow us. And I know I kind of ran a little bit long there on time, Frank, but if there are any questions right there in the last few minutes, I'll be glad to take them. Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries at all. It was incredible. So I really appreciate it. Just a wealth of information, as you mentioned. So I guess I will start with one of the questions that I know that I had, because I have been on the side of being down in Lumberton, if you will, on I-95 for the diverging diamond interchange down there, and I was. First time I went through that, I was like, why am I driving on the wrong side of the road? So for those that maybe be unfamiliar, can you just describe that a little bit about the benefits of that diverging diamond interchange? That's a loaded question.
Glad to. Yeah, and actually, before I do, I'll tell you this. when we started this process, there were only about a dozen of these in North Carolina, but actually now it's becoming more popular. If you look at this area, there's 5 going in just in the Raleigh area alone at 42. There's one on 440. There's one on I-40. There's one on this project. There's just a lot of them being built now. But basically, it simplifies the signal phasing to 2-phase, because really you've got 2 locations in the interchange where you're either waiting for traffic to cross over from right to left, or from the traffic that's already on to the left to cross back. And it pulls the right turn movements approaching the interchange. It goes ahead and pulls them out. They can go ahead and make that movement without ever going through a traffic signal. And it's really effective when you have a high left turn volume, because once you put traffic on the left side, they've gone through that simplified phasing, that simplified signal, they can go ahead and continue making those turns, and you don't have that long queue from people waiting to make that left turn movement. So it's really beneficial when you have those 2 types of movements.
Awesome. Well, like I say, it definitely works. I know, like that interchange on I-95 in Lumberton has like every known fast food restaurant that's ever been created is in that interchange. And I get off there every time, and I'm like, it's amazing how efficient this is. So I'm very appreciative of that. You stole my answer to, I already had the Math Act question queued up, so you already stole my answer on that. So you know your audience well. We did have a question from the group. Are noise walls provided only for subdivisions that were already in place before the record of decision?
No, it really depends on when they went on record. So basically, they don't have to be built, but their site plan has to be approved. And so if let's say, for instance, we've got a 100-acre property out there, and we go and we're negotiating with somebody now, and we take just a small portion, and they've got that left, and they go and develop something now and say, well, hey, now I've put 100 homes out here, I want you to build a wall. Well, our record of decision was in 2018. So it kind of goes down to who's on record first. So it's either they have the site plan approved first, or we have the ROD first. And that's sort of the line in the sand, if you will, as to the way that's typically decided.
Gotcha. And then this is a loaded question, so feel free to like get IT. This is probably a political question, so feel free to have IT issues all of a sudden. So, so I lived, before I moved to Columbia, I lived in North Raleigh, which is a free 540. I'll use that's a frank term. So how did, with this being the southern portion being a toll road, in a lot of people's minds, it's the same facility. It's the complete 540. With the southern portion being a toll road, I know there has been, some political opposition, and I hate to say opposition, maybe too harsh of a word, but there was some politics involved with northern Raleigh having free 540, a toll road on the southern side. Did that affect your ability to talk to folks or your negotiations, knowing that it was going to be a toll road necessarily versus a non-toll road? Does that make it? Do you understand what I'm getting at there?
I do. I get exactly what you're talking about, and it really gets down to there's a couple things, and like you, I know some people like it, some people can't wait. We have people begging us, finish it today. I want to be on it today. And I live in Johnston County. I worked in Durham for 10 years. I would have used it every single day had it been in place. But I don't work in Durham anymore, so it's built too late. So there's a couple of things at play. Number one is it's a function of, I mentioned earlier that local governments decide whether or not they want to request a toll facility. So the Turnpike Authority, we don't sit here and say, where can we put a road? Where can we go build a road and collect toll revenue? That's not the way it works. So what happened was the local governments around Raleigh, they looked at it and said, if we look at the available funding, so if you look at phase 1 and phase 2 together, for instance, it's projected to cost $2.2 billion, okay? So then if you look at the entire budget for DOT for a year, you're looking at around $2 billion. So basically what you would say to North Carolina is, we're not going to do any work anywhere in DOT except for around the Raleigh area, and we're going to take all that money and build phase 2, or phase 1 and phase 2. And it doesn't work like that. You've got to parse it out. You got to do it equitably and equally. And so those local governments came and said, the only way we can get this done in short order, which helps promote development, which provides mobility, is to consider it as a toll road. So we evaluated it. It worked prior to COVID. The existing facility was exceeding projections. And so it was what that means is it was really needed. And so just to give you an idea, that started opening up around 10, 11 years ago, the existing facility. If we had waited, if DOT had waited, they would just be breaking ground on that portion now, not to mention phase one would be a dream later on. Phase two would be way off in the distance. And so what that did was it allowed the benefits of that additional mobility to be there quicker. Now, DOT there's a state law that says once the debt is paid off, the tolls have to come off. So it's not something that people are, it's going to be there forever once that debt is paid. And again, if you look at studies show that building that facility, even though some people may opt not to use it, it actually improves other roads, because at our busiest point before COVID, we were exceeding 55, almost 60,000 vehicles a day. If that road wasn't there, think about that traffic on NC 55 and NC 54 and those places in US 1 and US 64, you'd have gridlock. And so even if people don't want to drive on the toll roads, they're receiving the benefits from those that do. And a lot of times when people may be opposed, and we've had some folks like that on the project, and I would stand in their front yard and explain tolling to them and explain that helps you get this facility faster, and they understand. And it's not like it's being, certain people get it and certain people don't. Certain people get a free road and certain people don't. It's a function of getting it so that it helps the entire area.
Gotcha. Makes total sense. Makes total sense. Well, I do appreciate it, Dennis. Thank you so much. It was a awesome presentation, as always, and we are very thankful and appreciate you and your coming out and helping us out here today and enlighten us on everything at 540. So I was up in Raleigh a couple of weeks ago and went through the construction of the turbine. So now I'll have a much better appreciation for it next week when I'm up there. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Frank.
With that, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out. A couple of last housekeeping items. We are making a recording of this and of this presentations today, so we will have that available for everyone. I want to thank you all for coming today. Once again, just a last reminder about the Chapter 31 Member Appreciation Month coming up in August. But with that, we're going to close down, and I really appreciate everyone coming out, and y'all have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.